Hello, my name is Rex Winn. I'm an Iron Speed Designer MVP, and today I'm going to show you briefly how you can use Visual Studio 2005 and Iron Speed Designer together to work on the same application. This might seem like an intimidating process for some of you, and I can certainly understand that, but as I go through this demonstration, I'll show you how easy it is to really do this and how much it can leverage Visual Studio to speed up your development in Iron Speed, and how you can still augment some of the rich, super fast, rad abilities of Iron Speed, and you can use these two applications side by side to accelerate your development process. To begin with, I've got an Iron Speed Designer sample application here that I've been working in, and what I want to do is show you in the Application Explorer the different pages that I have and what I've done. Now, the only thing I've done so far is I've bound Iron Speed to a photo gallery table, and here I can add, edit, show these photo gallery table pages. Let's go ahead and just do this briefly so that you can get a feel for the application. This is how I would add a record to my photo gallery table page. And here is my show photo gallery table page. And what I want to demonstrate is the power of using Visual Studio 2005 with Iron Speed Designer, and the things I want to focus on are debugging the application and leveraging Visual Studio's IntelliSense to speed up your development within Iron Speed Designer. Very simple things to do as long as you understand some basic concepts. So let's go ahead and open my rad demo project from within Visual Studio. Now, here is the very same page open in Visual Studio, and you can see it doesn't look very pretty. Don't be too concerned about these errors that you see, because we're actually not going to be doing anything with the user interface in Visual Studio. And as a matter of fact, I couldn't stress more that you do not make changes to the user interface, the ASPX page itself, from within Visual Studio. All we really want to focus on doing in Visual Studio is improving our ability to write, edit, and debug code. To that effect, let's go ahead and jump into the source code. I'm going to use the Application Explorer. Here's my photo gallery page, and I'm going to go ahead and expand this, and I'm going to jump into the code behind page. Now, one of the things that I want to stress is that while we're in here editing this page in Visual Studio, we want to make sure that this page is not open in Iron Speed Designer. And so what I want to do is, in the Application Explorer, I'm just going to go down and view the web.config file. It's the one file that I know that I'm not going to make changes in from Visual Studio. And so I won't get the conflict where Iron Speed has detected a change in Visual Studio and it wants to reload the page, or Visual Studio has detected that Iron Speed has changed a page and it wants to reload, and somehow I get confused and say yes or no and lose the actual changes that I've made within the application. So the point is to always make sure that you're in the web.config file, assuming that you're not actually making changes to it, so that the page that you're actually working in Visual Studio or Iron Speed doesn't conflict across editors. And this will become a little more clear as we do things. So let's jump back now into Visual Studio. And here is our Iron Speed Designer web application. You can see that we're using the Iron Speed base classes, .utils, .data, .sql provider, UI controls, etc. We can see that we're in our Iron Speed applications namespace, rad demo. And everything really should look just like a VS 2005 web application. Except in the Visual Studio Designer, we get to leverage some really cool, really powerful functions. Now I'm using Visual Studio 2005 Service Pack 1, and so I can already see that I've got some formatting in here that I'd like to clean up. I can do so with a quick key press of Control K plus D, and it's going to reformat my code for me. I can see by the asterisk up here that Visual Studio has detected I've changed code or something in the page, and I'm just going to go ahead and let it save that. And I'm going to do so using the file save command, or you could use the hotkey Control plus S. And you'll see once I'm done, that asterisk has gone away. The state of my application has now been written back to disk. So in Iron Speed applications, load data is the load event for the page. So if we wanted to, we could insert our own custom code in here to fire before the load event, and we might start simply just by introducing some comments, and we can just type in some comments, and then maybe what we want to do here is set a session variable, this dot page dot session app initiated. Maybe that's all we want to do, is set a session variable that tells the rest of our application can read to find out whether or not the application has started. Now, I didn't put a lot of thought into that session variable. There's no point in doing something like that, so don't read too much into it. I'm just demonstrating a concept. After this page has loaded, after it's called into our base class, we can execute additional code. And maybe that might be something to add custom values to a drop-down list. Maybe it might be to read all of the values in an IronSpeed table control and store those in some type of a state container. That might be a session variable. It might be, you write it to the server somehow. We have a lot of flexibility. And so one of the things that we might do, since we've already started down this road, is we can come in here and we can say if this.page.session app instantiated. Now, it would be good practice here, since I'm going to be using this, what would actually be good practice would be to get that asterisk out of there for one. What would be good practice would be to actually declare a variable and use a variable in here instead of this string, so that I don't inadvertently introduce any kind of a bug in here, because these string values won't be tested at compile time at all. So why don't I just go ahead and do that, and I'm going to come up here inside of the class declaration. Here is my public class declaration right here, and I'm just going to tuck in under this region. I'm going to say private, and I'm just going to call it you can use whatever naming convention you want. We could even go string SESS, and we might call it app inst. And we're going to set it equal to app instantiated. And now what we can do with Visual Studio is come in here, and we can just say SE, and it's going to automatically pick that up for us. And this is why I like using Visual Studio InDesigner. And we can simply hit the space key, and it'll put that in for us. And down here again, we'll go ahead and do that. Hit space. And now what we've done is we've protected our own code a little bit by using a variable that we won't mistype. We can use autocomplete to insert it in, and our application will run a little bit better. One thing I wanted to talk about before we use a session variable, always check and make sure it's not null. If it happens to be null and you try to work with it, you're going to throw an application error. So if it's not null, then what we want to do is we want to say if this.page.session .toString.trim equals true, do something else. And so we can insert some comments here, what to do if true. Oop, we don't need that. And what to do if false. So this just is simply to illustrate the idea of using Visual Studio inside of an IronSpeed Designer application. Again, I'm going to save these. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close both of these pages in Visual Studio, since I intend now to go into IronSpeed Designer. And what we're going to find in IronSpeed Designer is that when we go in here and look at our photo gallery, our Add Photo Gallery table page, we're going to find that our code is now in here and it's ready to rock and roll. So here's the code that we use with Visual Studio. Here's the variable I declared. Everything is exactly the way we would expect it to be. Let's go ahead and take out, let's comment this, and then let's remove this first test so that we're going to force a condition that's going to throw an error. And let's go ahead and set this to be our start page. Oop. And let's now run this application. Okay, so right away we've got a problem. We're inside of IronSpeed Designer. Now we've got an error. Great. What do we do? Web.config really isn't telling me much. I've got a stack trace down here. Boy, I just don't feel comfortable with anything that I'm seeing. Nothing is helpful. What do I do next? Well, this is what's really great, is we can use Visual Studio in this particular case, or any case where you've got an application error, and IronSpeed isn't telling you about it. IronSpeed didn't find any errors when it compiled, and neither would Visual Studio. Let's go ahead and close this. Let's go back into our web.config, and let's jump back into Visual Studio, and let's build and run this application. Now, right away, Visual Studio has told us a little bit more about the error than what IronSpeed did, and that's because when I initially built the application, it asked me if I wanted to turn on debugging in the web.config file. I did. Now we've got some more information to work with, and immediately we can tell what the problem is. I'm trying to reference a session variable that doesn't exist, and okay, that's kind of a problem. So let's say that we didn't get any information in here and we still didn't have any idea what our error actually is. We can go ahead and use Visual Studio to debug IronSpeed applications. And so what I would do here, only knowing that I've introduced changes in this method, is I'm just going to set a breakpoint in here, and now I'm going to build and run my application again. No errors yet, so I know that the error hasn't happened. Now I can use Visual Studio to I can go ahead and step through my application, and I'm going to do this using the menus. I'm going to click my debug menu, and F10 is what I want to use. So we will step over this, and we're just going to step down, and I already know that this is the line of code that's going to throw an error. But this demonstrates how we can use the debugger to encounter the error in our application and get some knowledge for how to go about fixing it. So here's our F10 again. Boom, right there. Visual Studio has done us a favor by showing us this dialog and helping us to understand that we're trying to reference something that doesn't exist. I'm going to close that. I know that there's no point in executing my application any further, so I'm going to stop Visual Studio. And now what we're going to do is we're going to uncomment our test, which would have caught that for us. Well, and now let's go ahead and save this again. And we'll release our breakpoint, and let's build and run. And already we've got a functioning application. So the purpose of this demonstration was simply to show you how easy it is to use Visual Studio with IronSpeed Designer to troubleshoot an application, and how to make use of the IntelliSense and some of the other features that you're comfortable using and really long to use. And the purpose of this isn't to show what IronSpeed doesn't do, because IronSpeed wasn't meant to replace Visual Studio. The purpose of this demonstration is to show you how to use Visual Studio and IronSpeed together to produce a rich application using an accelerated programming tool like IronSpeed Designer. And so if this concludes the demonstration, if you have any further questions about this, feel